last time, we had our distinguished guest, Michael Jones, who runs Inspiring Philosophy and who does amazing research. And we started it by talking about child marriage. And he brought up a number of research that he has been doing in regards to child marriage in Islamic context versus what Christianity teaches. And I told him that maybe today we can begin to focus our discussions more and zoom in on areas like physical harm of child marriage. So, Michael, I'd like to welcome you back to this show. And it's really exciting to have you, brother. And thank you so much for the amazing research that you do. To add to what you have shared with us last time, which was bits and pieces of different research, why don't we focus more now on the physical harm of child marriage? What can you tell us about that from a research standpoint?
Yeah, well, we need to talk about what would qualify as a child. So anyone, the United Nations says anyone under 18 is defined as a child. Why is that? Well, because girls complete puberty typically between 15 and 17. This is what when you open up any sort of medical literature on this. So a short little paper called Growth of the Birth Canal in Adolescent Girls. You look on the screen here, you can see growth of the birth canal here on the first chart here. And you can see basically menarche, that's when they get their first period, is around the age of 13. But really the growth of the birth canal does not really complete until girls hit between the ages of 15 and 17. And so you would expect, any reasonable person would expect that anyone expected to have a child before you complete puberty is going to suffer from complications because you're not ready yet. Your birth canal is not fully developed as a woman. You're not fully ready mentally, which we can talk about later, but physically, you're just still not fully developed there. So what do we see when we open up the literature? Well, United Nations has reported that a girl is 5 times more likely to die in childbirth when she's under the age of 15. And again, as we noted, this is because the birth canal is not fully developed. The reproductive system is not fully developed. Well, they're getting a lot of this from a research done in the 1980s. So what this was a paper, The Influence of Maternal Age and Parity on Childbearing, with special references to age 15 girls and under. And so they noted that in Africa, for example, in one of these African nations, that girls under 15 were 5 times more likely to die than a woman in her 20s. If you go to table 4.3, you can see girls under 15 or at 15 have a much higher maternal mortality rate per 1,000 than women that are in their 20s, as you can see, much, much higher. Now, a lot of Muslims get upset with this and they say, well, it's just such a low sample size. Well, other research has come out recently which supports this. So very recently, in 2005, there was a study called Maternal Prenatal Morbidity and Mortality Associated with Adolescent Pregnancy in Latin America, a cross-sectional study. And they noted in their paper that a girl under 15 is 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth than a woman aged 20 to 24. So it's not 1 in 5, it's a little less at 1 in 4, but it's still rather high. This also uses adjusted ratios, so it's much more reliable. And again, they show that girls, when they're not fully developed, are much, much more likely to die in pregnancy. And if you look at table 4, for example, once they hit 16, you can start to see that decline happen rapidly. Why? Because this is the age that girls have basically fully developed, as the medical literature shows. But under 15 and under, they're not. And so you have a much higher death rate, and that's really unfortunate. So we need to recognize that girls have not completed puberty should not even be considered to have children. And we don't even talk about the mental harm. Girls 16, 17, 18, there's still a lot of mental harm there. But 15 and under, a lot of physical problems like physical death, obstructed labor, obstetric fistulas, these kinds of things happen. So 15 out of the question, 9 definitely out of the question. Those ages are definitely not no girl should be expected to bear children at those ages. But this is what the medical literature tends to point to.
Right, and yet the author of the Quran, allegedly a god by the name of Allah, somehow in chapter 65, verse 4, which is known as the chapter of divorce, or they call it sometimes the mini woman chapter, because there is chapter 4 that is called also the woman chapter. In there, the child marriage is promoted. It's clearly stating about a woman who has yet to have its menstruate, and basically hasn't basically had her period, I should say, the monthly, and at the same time. Islam somehow had no problem with this, yet a lot of Muslims sadly jump into trying to defend the fact that the language in the Quran does not really promote child marriage, but yet Muhammad set an example for that, as you stated clearly earlier, that somehow just because Muhammad did it, it's okay to do. And whatever Muhammad actually does is used as an example by the admission of the Quran. So, is there anything else about the physical harm you want to add, or do you want to jump into the mental harm?
No, let's keep talking about the physical harm for this episode because there's more. There's a lot more.
Please.
So,
Yep.
so there was a study published called Risk Factors for Obstetric Fistulas, a clinical review. Now, an obstetric fistula is where a hole develops in the birth canal, and it can lead to all sorts of problems, leakage of urine, feces, blood, nerve damage, which can cause the inability to walk, the decreased likelihood of conceiving of a second healthy child, as well as can cause the death of the girl through something like maternal sepsis. Sepsis is where you get basically an infection that can develop in the birth canal during childbearing years. An obstetric fistula can really just make that worse. Well, they note, looking at numerous African nations, that the increased obstetric risk in teenagers can partially be explained by anatomic immaturity. Teenage pregnancies account for a higher proportion of all pregnancies in developing countries. These findings suggest that efforts to reduce obstetrical fistula should target teenagers. So they note basically in this paper that girls, teenagers basically, are much higher risk for developing an obstetric fistula, especially in developing countries. Why? Because again, the birth canal has not been developed yet. And so you can develop these holes. There was a study done in Washington State in the US, and they noted that teenagers are a higher risk of developing maternal sepsis. Now, if you were in a developed country, just give the girl a bunch of antibiotics, she'll be fine. But if you're a teenager in Mali or Togo, Nigeria, Afghanistan, and you develop an obstetric fistula, you're also at a much higher risk of developing maternal sepsis. Combined with those, you're going to increase the girl's likelihood of dying in pregnancy, because if you got a hole developed in your birth canal and you're already at a higher risk for developing an infection from pregnancy, that's just a recipe for disaster. So we see these types of things in the literature where girls are just far more likely to suffer from all these pregnancy complications over women in their 20s. And so, yes, even if they do not die in pregnancy, God willing, we don't want any girl to die in pregnancy, but you're still more likely to develop from complications like developing obstetric fistula, which won't necessarily kill the poor girl, but it could lead to all these other complications. And that needs to be addressed as well. That needs to be noted as well, that, hey, if they still live, there's still a likelihood there's going to be a problem.
That is true. And I just want to tell people, myself and my guest here, we're not attacking cultures. We're not attacking race. We're being reasonable here by sharing research from science. And one would expect the God of the Quran should know better when it comes to things like this, should enlighten actually cultures and society about those kind of areas. Yet, the author of the Quran actually endorses things that research so far have proven to bring about the damage that results from this. So just wanted to make sure that people understand that. So carry on, brother. What else you want to add in the next maybe 2 minutes or so?
Yeah, Nawal Noor in her paper, Health Consequences of Child Marriage in Africa, noted the problem with children delivering children is that young mothers are at a significantly higher risk than older women for debilitating illnesses and even death. So, this is just well known across the literature that a teenager is far more likely to suffer from complications and problems in these developing countries than a woman in her 20s. Obstetric fistulas, illnesses, obstructed labor. Obstructed labor often leads to death. And if your birth canal is not fully developed, what do you think is going to happen? The one paper I cited earlier on the birth canal issue, growth of birth canal in adolescent girls, they note that a lot of these teenage girls often deliver children with low birth weight. So that's not a good thing. But the circumference of the cranium is not smaller, but they still have low birth weight. So it's not like they're delivering smaller babies at a smaller size kind of thing as people think. The bone structure is still the same, and that's hard for girls to deliver. But they still are delivering children with low birth weight, which is not good for the newborns themselves. So not only do we see problems with the girls in these pregnancies, but also problems with their offspring. They're more likely to be born with low birth weight or inefficient nutrients, or even die. There's infant mortality rates are higher for child mothers as well in the research. So there's just a lot of problems, and this just shows that we should be waiting for girls to hit the age of at least 18. Why? Because once again, girls complete puberty between the ages of 15 and 17. So it makes sense we assign the age of adulthood after that stage. So the following year, 18, it just naturally follows. Some Muslims claim it's an arbitrary number we pick. That's nonsense. It's a well-defined number based on the literature.
Yes, that's excellent. Do you think next time we can talk about the mental harm of
Oh,
child marriage?
absolutely.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. With me here in studios is our dear brother, Michael Jones, who runs Inspiring Philosophy. And we have been covering the topic of child marriage from different scientific research standpoint. Today, we focused our discussion on the physical harm of child marriage. Next time, we will talk about the mental harm of child marriage. And I assure you that many of you who are watching this probably are shaking your head and saying it's common sense. It's common sense, as I myself am saying that without having to look at scripture or anything else, because a child is different than an adult. That's why we're calling it child marriage. Well, Michael, thank you so much again, as always. And I want to encourage people to please go to check his channel, Inspiring Philosophy, and also subscribe to his channel so you can receive his publications through that. Until next episode, everyone, have a blessed day.